Texas Politics Project conducted a poll on several policies that the campaign presidents are asking on the campaign trail right now, like the idea of banning Muslims from entering the U.S., the idea of having a wall along the border, and transgender access to restrooms. These are all topics that people seem to have a strong opinion on. So this morning we have Jim Henson with the Texas Politics Project to go over some of those poll results with us. Good morning.
Glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. Okay, let's talk about the ban on Muslims. What was the question specifically, and then what were the results?
On the ban on Muslims, we asked if people supported or opposed banning Muslims who are not citizens from immigrating to the United States. We found 52% in favor of that, with lots of partisan structure in those results. So if you look at the big red column is Democrats, the big blue column is, or the big red column is Republicans, big blue column is Democrats. Sure. Overwhelming support among Republicans, much less support among Democrats, suggesting that this is really being channeled in part by the presidential campaign. Right
along those party lines of what Trump and Clinton have been talking about. I remember you being here back in February and asking the same question of Texans, and the results were a little different back then.
Right, back then we had seen a little less than half supporting the ban. Again, not surprising given baseline politics in Texas,
sure,
the stories in the air and partisanship, but it's increased a lot, and particularly among Republicans, an increase of more than 10 points since February supporting that idea.
And what about when you ask the question of, do you support a wall along the border? That was Trump's many talking points on the campaign trail.
Well, you know, this is another area where we can see the presidential campaign having a real effect on attitudes.
Sure.
About 52% also support the wall on the border with Mexico. And the numbers internal to that look strikingly similar to that of the Muslim ban. Over 70% of Republicans support the idea. Much lower support, almost a mirror image, among Democrats.
Okay, now let's talk about the newer issue that has been in the news recently. It would have to do with the transgender restrooms. We know that the Attorney General has an opinion on this. We know the Lieutenant Governor does. What do Texans have to say about this?
Well, we asked, a few different questions about this. I think what we have here to talk about today. One, we asked people what basis should the policy be based on in terms of admission to bathrooms? Should it be birth gender or should it be gender identification? What we found that in Texas, most Texans favored using birth gender by a pretty wide margin. The minority position was using gender identity. Again, if you break that down, tons of partisan difference, though not as much as on these other issues.
Right.
I think 80% of Republicans favored using birth gender, much lower number among Democrats, but a little more divided.
We were just talking about a story today about how the AG has issued an opinion saying that parents didn't really give their consent about what's happening in the Fort Worth ISD. I'm wondering if there were some parents on the phone with you guys when you were conducting this poll asking themselves, maybe I should have an opinion on this and give it to my school district.
Well, almost certainly, and again, there's a lot of difference depending on what your political philosophy and your partisan identification are. So we asked people, where should this policy be set? Should it be set by the federal government, state government, or local school districts? The majority opinion was local school districts. That was the most frequent response. But if you break that down, again, Democrats much more likely to see this as being guided by federal policy in the best of all possible worlds. Republicans much more likely to want these decisions made either by the state or most frequently by school districts.
To have some kind of input on where they're, what policy their kid might be able to.
I think education's an area where we hear a lot of talk about local control, and that's an idea that gets applied to education a lot. I think we're seeing that in part here.
Well, I am fascinated by these results, and thank you so much for being here. I know you have a busy day.
My pleasure.
All right.